with the portfolio in engineering, you're conveying the story of the car and the engineering.
Portfolios that follow a structure of a page per kind of criterion are actually becoming rather obsolete.
The criteria is a tricky thing in terms of getting specifically written what it wants.
I think you're writing your portfolio or elements of your portfolio before you start designing your car.
Hello and welcome to Off the Track. Today we're going to be discussing the engineering portfolios, and I have joining me Jesse Stevens from Infinitude.
Hello.
Feifei from Ascension.
Hello.
And Ethan from
Endeavour.
Hello. And any other teams?
Ionic.
There we go. And I was part of Infinitude and Precision Racing. So, Jesse, do you want to kick us off? What do you think is one of the most important aspects of the engineering portfolio?
I think we're starting to sound like a bit of a broken record here, Michael, but it's addressed the criteria. I think with all of us and all the elements of the portfolio, there's kind of a read the criteria and just work to it, because there's a lot of teams that kind of are in the higher bands for like their actual technical knowledge, but say they can't actually reach that. And in an engineering portfolio, you might have like a 17 or an 18 score, but you can only end up getting like an 11 at max because you're in the lower band. That being said, I think the reading the criteria is the most important thing.
All right. Feifei, what do you think is the most important, or would you agree in general with Jesse?
Yeah, absolutely. In general, I would agree with Jesse in the sense that the engineering scorecard is your best friend in terms of what you want in the actual content for the portfolio. You want to be able to break down that portfolio and base it according to each of the criteria sections. But in saying that, if we extend on that a bit further, I would say a very important aspect of that a lot of teams do miss is being able to justify design decisions. And a big part of that would be, I believe, dedicating the bulk of the portfolio in terms of testing, data, and results, things like that.
So I think in previous episodes, a few members have said, why have we done something, and justify it. And I think justification as well with a portfolio is vitally important for any kind of things, because in the engineering design process in university level or higher level in industry, the whole idea is kind of to justify your decisions with research and with data, and you can't do that easily. You need to do that to be able to, actually get the best product possible.
Yeah, you're not publishing a scientific journal article without all of the results and justifications as to why you made the conclusions you drew. And so you're at the start of your project, right? You're starting to design a car. When do you start writing the portfolio? Do you start it then, or do you start it 2 months before, 1 month before the competition?
I think you're writing your portfolio or elements of your portfolio before you start designing your car. Because before you start designing your car, you need to know why you're designing a car, what concepts you need to design around, how much of the car realistically impacts your overall score. And the portfolios are widely neglected in the competition. So the car's worth roughly the same as the portfolio.
180 points for the engineering portfolio.
And I think the racing's 220, 250. So it's pretty much an even split, 70 points difference. And I think you need to spend similar time on it.
Yeah.
I would mostly agree with that, but I would just like to add on, a lot of the time with the portfolios, we're trying to sort of surmise large sections of what we've done. So an alternative to that, obviously you do want to start the portfolio as early as possible. But in terms of engineering work, it never hurts just to start or build like an engineering document that is separate to the portfolio. That way, everything that you do can be documented in that without having to, cut down things. And that just gets all the content ready as you go. So when you're actually writing the content for the portfolio towards the latter stages of a competition, everything's there, ready to go, basically.
And I'm fairly sure Infinitude had an engineering supplementary document, did they not? Yeah?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we did. And Ethan, did one of your teams do that?
We didn't our national finals, but the world
Yeah.
finals, there was a
Okay.
Folio document.
Yeah. And Ascension?
Yeah,
Yeah.
same with Ascension.
So your suggestion is that these teams write as they go along the engineering details,
Yeah.
and what they've done and what they plan to do and what they've done, what worked well, what didn't, and then summarize that in the portfolio.
Absolutely. I would just say it's sometimes difficult to write everything in the portfolio because, again, you're working to a restricted amount that you have to write. So if you have that additional document that you're not actually marking, then that can basically document the entire process without cutting anything out.
The stuff that you cut out is the stuff that isn't covered by the criteria.
Yeah, that's the stuff that you can decide to cut out when you're actually putting it in and polishing it for the portfolio.
Yeah, okay. And so we've gotten to the end we've gotten to where we're starting the portfolio, whenever that may be. How do you decide, how do you include the information? What's your process for making sure that you include all that information?
I'll take over. I would say the main element that you want to focus on is, again, the criteria. It does vary for different teams, but I would say a good sort of way to determine if the content does fit that you want in the portfolio is to, first of all, get those sections into the portfolio that meet the criteria, and then you can find the content or the data that justifies certain sections. So for our team, anyways, the bulk of it was development. So a lot of it was needing data and test results to justify certain developments in design. We had multiple tables throughout the development sections for each of our, I believe, 9 prototypes. And that basically covers the main points in the criteria for things like application of computer-aided analysis, testing, research and development, things like that. A lot of teams, I think, get that wrong in the sense that they dedicate an entire page to going through an overview of what that means or how they did it without actually providing the data using that software to justify the design.
Right.
I think that's a thing to add to what Fefe said was that a lot of that data, a lot of teams either present no data but like talk about how they did it, or they present the data in a way that it doesn't really make sense. I think one of the big tasks of the engineering portfolio in general is actually conveying very technical information in a very simple manner. There's no real point in, using a bunch of technical jargon that is really difficult and really straining to read when you're not really it's really hard for people to pick up on that versus it pretty much like very simple language, very simple ways of conveying message. Because in industry, in normal documents, they don't, unless it's a legal document usually, most of the time communication is very simple and very easy to understand. So I think keep it simple, but also make sure that you're meeting every single piece of criteria to the highest band, then I think that's perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the markers of these portfolios won't have days on end to read through your portfolio.
Yeah, so you want to make it easy for the judges to give you points.
Cram it full of words.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like what you write in terms of content, you can substitute with graphics, like tables, graphs and things like that.
It's the kind of thing where a picture paints 1,000 words.
Exactly. Conveys the exact same thing, but far more efficiently. And for the judges, it's clear evidence of that support.
Did you have any examples of things that a team might typically try and describe in words that they should represent as a graph or an image?
I think like CFD is a massive one where teams will show a screenshot of their car in like a simulation, but they won't show how their car evolves with the simulations or how they've used the simulation to kind of drive their car development.
Yeah, it's good to see that you've got that image there in your folio, that you're using that CFD, but they don't display the understanding of how that CFD is affecting their design, or at least they don't show evidence of that.
Yeah, and they'll say, hey, we put our car in CFD. They haven't said, this is how CFD you fixed our car kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great example. To continue on with that, to break that down, you could be incrementally testing something on the side pods, for example. One way of conveying that for a lot of teams would be, again, to screenshot an image of the side pod through CFD or, I don't know, FEA, something like that. But what's far more effective, I believe anyway, is to show the incremental improvements on maybe a table or dot points, things like that, displaying what different side pods and how they affect maybe the drag coefficient and things like that.
And the graphics designer in me is coming out here. A composite image of overlaid different styles of like a side pod, would that be something that could be valuable? Or
Well, I think it really depends on how you want to display things.
Yeah.
I kind of think that actual pictures of the designs are not very helpful.
Yeah.
I think they're more for a design document. But I think you have maybe the first and the final, and you show maybe how you've gone from one to the other with just your data and your drag. I think it's a really good thing. Ethan, you want to add anything?
No.
That's all right.
I'll just add one final thing to that. I think we talk about CFD and stuff and how it's good to mainly focus on the evidence for design. But if you have done something unique with your virtual testing or physical testing, what we did as a team anyway in Ascension was we had sort of an introduction page for our engineering portfolio. And basically in that introduction, we tried to contextualize as much information throughout the portfolio as possible. That's the sort of section that you would want to briefly talk about your processes and methodologies in.
Right. Okay. So you'd talk about first the methodologies you applied to all of the design areas and testing areas and how your testing informed design, and that kind of thing. Okay, that works in really well with what David Powell Freeman, one of the guests we had on another episode, said, that at the start of your portfolio you want to have a table of contents of sorts to organize your portfolio, and recommended that the portfolio be organized basically according to the criteria that you're working through. And so with the portfolio in engineering, you're conveying the story of the car and the engineering. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Jesse, do you want to continue?
I think effectively it's an entire how did we get from our last competition to here. That's how I see it anyway.
Yeah.
It could even be how your car started at the very start of your entry to here, but I usually say it's the way that your car has developed in between your last two competitions.
Or if you're starting out fresh, it's what you learn from having maybe a base set of skills in CAD. And you're telling the judge, or you're showing the judges the development of skills and the learning that's taken place. Correct?
100%.
Yeah. I would say also it's a story, but I guess the industry equivalent of that is basically you're following the design process. So what, like the introductory page for the contextualization would be sort of your design brief, where you're given the objectives of competition, you're breaking down the problem, things like that. Then you want to go into your sort of like ideation, conceptual phases, then moving on to your more development-focused phases, then manufacturing, so on, so on. Structure it, kind of like that.
So listeners of the podcast for a while now will know that I do not have the biggest engineering background. And so should I be able to pick up the portfolio and go, oh yeah, I understand what's going on? Or are you trying to convey a very technical message to the judges?
Anyone with, basic literacy skills should be able to read it and say, or a reasonable level of literacy skills should be able to read it and at least kind of understand what you're saying.
And is that just literacy, or is that literacy in engineering techniques?
Oh no, just I think general reading. I think you might not find it very interesting, but I think if you can pick it up and read it, you could definitely at least logically understand how people make decisions and how people in the team have done that.
I think, and part of that that's the benefit of using graphics like graphs, tables, and things like that.
So easy to understand.
They convey the technical portions that you need to convey to the judges, but also to the casual reader. You know, you look at a table, you see the incremental improvements. You can tell that the numbers, there's a quantitative improvement that doesn't need to be explained technically.
Yeah, okay. I think that's a very good way of putting that. So, Ethan, in your portfolio, how did you ensure that it wasn't too technical, and how did you manage the kind of scope creep that is talked about in the project management side of the F1 competition?
Yeah, so definitely one of the things we did do at the start of competition was write down what we wanted to have on each page. So even though it'd be like just a brief description on like the engineering and manufacturing sides, like we want to talk about the manufacturing, the sanding and the painting and all that process. And yeah, so that's what we do on each page. You just have a little excerpt, what you want on each page, how much, how many pictures do you want, and all that.
Okay. And did that work effectively, or did that plan get thrown in the bin at some point?
It worked effectively sometimes, but at some points it did get thrown in the bin because you think you have a good page to talk about stuff, but then you realize like, oh, I missed this really important piece, and then you have to end up chopping and changing throughout the portfolio.
And how did you come up with that original plan
of
the portfolio when you decided what was on each page?
Yes, so for us it was just, again, as everyone else has said a couple of times, just following the scorecards. And so if there's an engineering manufacturing scorecard, you have an engineering manufacturing page.
Yeah.
And yeah, for us as well, there was CAD analysis, so CAD analysis page and so forth.
Right, okay. Brilliant. And this design process evaluation, to score top marks, you need to have excellent ongoing idea evaluations linked to improvement actions. One of the things that David Pralfreeman, one of the guests on another episode we mentioned previously, he suggested, well, actually I think it was Riley that suggested that you have an evaluation at the end of each page of that page's content. David seemed to agree that was a good idea. Fefe and Jesse, your thoughts?
I always love an evaluation, a very simple, like few sentences, and usually some teams structure their portfolios to be more like a timeline of how they did their work, and some structure it more like this is a certain thing we do. Especially with the timeline style portfolios, having like maybe 5 or 6 sentences at the bottom saying this is what we intended to set out, this is what we did, this is what we learned from it, and how we're going to use this to improve.
What do you mean by a timeline portfolio?
So there's a lot of portfolios that kind of document, rather than documenting the individual pages of
design concepts,
and splitting the pages up into those. It's more like it starts off when you start your design process, and it goes through, hey, all your concept selection as part of all your design, like your design brief is all done on the one page, and then you follow the engineering design process throughout the rest of the portfolio. So say you do your concept selection, your testing, your refinement, your management, and with those kind of things, with that kind of style portfolio, it's really important to evaluate at each step of the portfolio. So I really think evaluations, just 5 or 6 sentences saying, hey, these concepts, we looked at all of them and we saw that this, that, and the other didn't work, and this one worked. And now moving forwards, we're going to apply this concept, and this concept moving forwards, and we'll see how the next step goes, and kind of introduce the next step before you've kind of talked about it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, the only thing I would add on to that, I agree for the most part. I would say, again, coming back to development, practically, I think 60% of our portfolio was development. That is the benefit of structuring your portfolio like that. We talk about idea evaluation linked to improvement action. The best way to demonstrate that, obviously you want to incorporate that in each section, but if we talk more practically in terms of the actual car design, when we talk about idea evaluations, those are each of the concepts that you bring into each new prototype. And if you do the testing and get the data, that is what you talk about when evaluating those designs.
I'm actually starting to think that portfolios that follow a structure of a page per kind of criterion are actually becoming rather obsolete. I would think that they don't display, because you can't really display 3D modeling skills on a page. It kind of comes through more of your design process and showing how you used your 3D modeling throughout your concepts, right?
If you're not following the criteria to lay out the portfolio, how are you easily showing the judges that you have, with your example of 3D modeling, how can you show that you've got an advanced use of 3D modeling techniques through highly detailed modeling designed for manufacturer considerations?
Sorry, do you want me to go, or do you want to?
I can take over for this. I would just say for like something like 3D modeling, that might be slightly more tricky to demonstrate throughout, just because of how, I guess, specific the criteria is.
And you'll be relying on how familiar the reader is with your CAD package, I would imagine.
But for something more like vague, I guess when we talk about a section like testing, purposeful testing with method and outcomes documented, something like that, where that's not really specific to demanding one particular section. That's the kind of thing that you would put into development as actual justification. Yeah. Because it doesn't demand specific things at once.
Yeah. I think I kind of agree with what Fefe says, but I'd also, the way that I would structure my pages now would be that every page kind of hits every criteria to some extent. So I think, say, 3D modeling, one of the criteria of that is designed for manufacture, right? So I know a lot of cars start off being designed, a lot of prototypes start off not being designed for manufacture, and then you have to kind of bring that in, or you might consider it beforehand, and then what considerations have you made in your prototype to manufacture it, or and then how have you applied analysis to this concept or these different things. And I think if you intertwine a lot of different things on the same page, I think you're actually showing a higher level of understanding, because you're just applying it throughout the engineering design process, which shows a much higher technical level to a judge than kind of just having a page saying, yeah, we did some testing, yeah, we did some analysis, yeah, we looked at design concepts, yeah, we had a modeling. Like, you know, it's kind of, I feel it's a lot more useful to kind of structure it like that.
Yeah. When you say it like that, yeah, I definitely agree. If you can weave all the criteria points throughout the portfolio,
you need to make them obvious
consistently. Well, you don't want to make it too obvious.
Yeah, I suppose. But it needs to be something that a person can recognize. An average person can recognize. If you gave them this sheet and said, show me that there's an advanced use of 3D modeling techniques.
Exactly.
I suppose maybe at a world's level, they'll say every single portfolio here shows an advanced use. But these judges know what an advanced use is and what an advanced use is not. You know, doing probably getting a bit technical here, doing a remove from one body to another in CATIA may be considered advanced at a state level, but at a world's, if you're not using something like generative shape design, maybe advanced CAD methods would not be considered.
No,
and you need to be able to display that clearly, that the judges will say, well, yeah, that's advanced.
Yeah. Technical merit is obviously great to showcase throughout the portfolio, but I guess all I'm just saying is you don't want to be too explicit with those kind of things, because if you do go down that route, you're going to take up a lot more space of the portfolio. Yeah, that could be dedicated to, I guess, more important things.
Yeah, I agree with Beth A. what he's saying there. I think it's a really important thing that you don't also lose the nature of what the portfolio is intended to be while trying to meet all the criteria. And obviously that kind of sounds counterintuitive to what we've been saying, but I think like you can't just have every page have a heading that says design for manufacture and advanced modeling and stuff like that. It's obviously make it obvious in more subtle ways, but you don't want it to be just like, hey, the judge is thinking this is just a tick off point kind of thing, because then they won't tick it off. They'll just know that you're actually after marks.
You want to incorporate every criteria point, but you don't necessarily have to structure your portfolio according to those points.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I think that brings us on to a good topic of the portfolio has limited space. So the competition regs say that each team must produce 2 identical hard copy, 11-page maximum, design and engineering portfolio. And so the usable space on that portfolio is about 10 10 pages. Let's be honest, because you're going to have a cover page. Otherwise, your graphics designer is going to have something to say to you.
Well, isn't the cover page also used to mark renders?
Yes, it probably
It's
would
a
be.
needed thing, yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got 10 pages.
Yeah, you've got 10 pages of content.
I think the first thing to do with portfolio space that we should discuss is don't fill it with crap, or don't fill the portfolio with things that don't need to be there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because you can write a portfolio. You might have 5 pages of content, but then you realize that that's not enough content, and you get to a point where you're just trying to flesh it out, and you end up writing a paragraph about the Wikipedia of CATIA, and that's not very helpful to anyone.
No.
And it doesn't meet the criteria. So obviously, I think to avoid writing too little, because a lot of teams don't actually document their work while they're doing it. I would suggest to teams document while they're doing it, and it's a lot easier to cut down work than it is to expand on work, because pretty much you can only list what you've done, and
human memory is a finicky thing. You'll start to realize this as you get older. If you're in your year 8, year 9, your memory is probably fairly good still. But events from a long time ago, when you started your car, can you remember why you changed that fillet to be 3.5 mil instead of 6? No, I'm betting you can't. But if you record that in the engineering document, you're going to be able to recall because you've got it there as a written record, you know? And so I think you've written here, Jesse, that will including this earn you any points? I think everyone can agree that that's a good mentality to have when you're writing. Yeah?
Yeah. I would say,
you look like you're a bit ambivalent on that point.
no, I absolutely agree, but I would just say it is a bit tricky. I mean, being fairly fresh off a competition, the criteria is a tricky thing in terms of getting specifically written what it wants. It's quite vague, especially in some areas of the criteria, and it's hard to really know if you've written too little or too much for that section. So it is definitely a balancing act in terms of trying to meet what the criteria wants and also not filling up the portfolio with verbal vomit, basically.
So I guess a question for all three of us, how would if you've got, say, you're not sure if things going to score you points, how would you ensure that the space that you are using is giving you points?
Ethan, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, as Fefe said, yeah, it is a very finicky thing. Sometimes you think this one fantastic thing you found out, will give you points, but when judges end up marking it, they'll give you no points. So yeah, as Fefe said, it's very finicky, and yeah, it's just difficult to try to figure out what will give you points and what won't.
How do you figure that out?
So one of the things that I would do would be a thing of, if we've got more content than we need in the portfolio, look at the 2 pieces of content you're thinking about putting in that specific spot, or maybe you've got a page and you want to try and only put things, you want to put more things than it can fit. What's the thing that's more likely to give you points than the others? And then you might not get more points, but you might have given yourself more of a chance of getting points, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm going to put all of 3 of you on the spot. Could you come up with an example of 2 things that would be very close for inclusion and the idea process behind it? Or do you recall anything that you didn't include and you think maybe you should have?
I think for us, the advantage that we had was we had a LERS. So a lot of our development was also based on our LERS. So it was discerning between, do we want to include more LERS development in our portfolio, or do we want to include more car development in our portfolio?
And how does the innovativeness of that system affect its inclusion? Because obviously this competition has a focus on innovation. If your car is not as innovative as your LERS was, would you have included more about the LERS, or is that a factor you think is a good consideration?
I think realistically, if you can justify your decisions in your portfolio and justify why you're putting it in there, then you're pretty much on a path to success regardless. If you think either or will be good, or if you think that both will be good, and you can justify why it would be in there, I think that's a good kind of thing to do.
I got another example, 3D modeling. That was definitely something, like I said, with the criteria, it actually just says for 3D modeling, advanced use of 3D modeling techniques, highly detailed modeling, things like that. Again, very vague points. So when we were actually doing that, it was difficult to filter out what was needed and what wasn't.
And the example they give is very helpful. And for those who didn't catch that, that was sarcastic. The example they give you is fillets, which I think was the third thing I learned when I was starting to engineer a car in my very first year of F1 in schools. So yeah, sorry, Fefe, continue.
Yeah, all good, all good. Yeah, I would agree. Things like fillets and things like that. Like basic things that you learn at the start of 3D modeling that you might want to include in the portfolio as, yeah, we did this, look at us, may not necessarily be relevant when you're actually writing the portfolio. And that's the benefit of, like we said earlier, having that separate document ongoing as you do the engineering process. Because down the line, you could look back on certain things where at the start you were like, yeah, this will be great to chuck in the portfolio. Later on, you might think, nah, this wasn't it. Those are the type of things that we would cut out. And at the end of the day, for something like 3D modeling, as long as you get the outline of what you did with some examples of technical merit, that's the main things that they're looking for in terms of your modeling.
I think Fefe raises a great point there. I think a lot of the criteria that's open-ended is often a great opportunity to show your technical merit. Because, say, the 3D modeling, it's left openly obvious because they don't want to firstly restrict students' kind of ideas, and because if it just says, hey, use generative shape design or something like that, it's just going to stop teams going further than that. So I think it allows, if you've got good technical merit in your CAD and you've got good technical merit in other ambiguous categories, it's a great place to show it. And the judges are more likely to give you points in those areas if you show and demonstrate things very well. I think also a helpful thing with those more ambiguous criteria is discern between, say, the higher scores and then the middle scores. So say for 3D modeling, appropriate modeling in development stages, dimensional constraints of F1 model block considered, right? So that is also what I would consider a reasonable, like appropriate 3D modeling is this pretty much allowed us to do whatever we wanted, right? So how do you build on that? And then that's what you can discuss in your portfolio.
I think the example they give in there is equally as unhelpful. Dimensional constraints of F1 model block considered. I don't know. That seems to be something very basic, but especially for a world competition, or is this just me having the benefit of hindsight here? Because I think it's important for our viewers to note that hindsight is 2020. And so, as Fefe said, if you look back on engineering decisions you made, which you thought were the bee's knees at the time, you thought they were great, you come to the end of the project, you're looking back on this engineering log you've developed, and you say, oh, well, that actually wasn't brilliant. I mean, what do we think? Is that a good example, or do you think there's something better you could use as an example?
I've got a perfect example for that, actually. At the start of developing our final car, to follow that kind of thing, we had this whole modeling setup where we modeled each of the major regulation points around the car. That's the type of thing you don't necessarily need to include in the portfolio. But in saying that, that's the kind of thing that you can add in as a graphic underneath maybe just a brief sentence or something explaining how you did meet different constraints.
And that really works with what David said on another episode, that you generally need subtitles for your images. You need to credit where the images come from, and then probably have a line describing what the image is. A lot of our viewers are probably too young, but go pick up one off a coffee table and you'll see on the newspaper that under each image on your front page, you'll have a description of what's happening in the image and who took the photo. And that's probably something you want to follow in the portfolio.
Captions and figures, figures especially, are essential in engineering reports and things like that. So again, if it's something that is properly utilized in industry, it's probably going to be of benefit to you in the engineering portfolio.
So you mentioned industry there, right? Looking back on our kind of time in the competition, and now we're all a bit further in the industry, from a industry perspective, what would have you changed about your portfolios?
A whole lot. I'll say that. I'll say this. When we're in the competition, it's easy because when, we're just high school students, we're approaching this from sort of like an amateur level. And everything we do is based on mostly our own research and work. So not everything is going to be exactly the way that we want them. But coming out of that into an actual engineering degree or something related to STEM, you can easily spot what things that you could have improved professionally to elevate that to an industry standard. So something for our team especially was testing methodologies. The way that we conducted testing and also documented that testing was not necessarily in the, I say, correct format or the most efficient format. And that's something we could definitely have improved. So where we sort of had long explanations of our design followed by tables of how they worked, that could have been condensed into far briefer points about the concept, maybe a section evaluating those concepts with that supplementary evidence beneath.
I think Ethan, probably being the most industry experienced of the lot of us, do you also want to add anything onto that? So what from your industry experience would you have, now knowing what you know, how would have you changed your portfolio?
Well, for me, because I was a drafts person for 9 months, not specifically the portfolio, but the engineering drawings, I noticed that the level that we do engineering drawings in F1 schools is completely different to a drafts person's. And for me, I was working on some chains and some mining equipment. So if I was to ever go back to, if I was to ever become my young self again, I'd definitely change my engineering drawings because they were not up to the industry standard to the people that were looking at these and marking them for us.
So how do you go about finding industry standards for 15, 16-year-olds? Because I know they're pretty intimidating.
Yeah, so industry standards are really intimidating. They're hundreds of pages long, depending on which ones you're looking at. But there are articles online where they do simplify it for younger people. So I can't think of an example off my head, but there are websites out there where you can access industry standards for free as a student, or your teachers can look up. Usually at your school library, they usually have some type of standards there.
And do we think that, this question's for both Fethe and Ethan, do we think that maybe having an engineer maybe that's familiar with the competition but a few years older in a more vocational path is helpful, and maybe getting education from them on how to be more engineering based in your process? Do we think that's a good idea?
Yeah, I was just about to add that on. Like I said before, going out of high school, out of a competition into uni, we learn these things and see what we did wrong. But whilst you're still in the competition, you don't have that knowledge. You don't have the benefit of hindsight. So absolutely, collaboration and mentorship with professionals in the industry is a huge, huge benefit you want to take in immediately, as soon as possible. For us, we had a few for our team, but we didn't really use them to the best of our ability throughout the competition. And that's one major downside throughout our design process. You want to be able to have somebody reliable, somebody who's familiar with the industry, to be able to help you and guide you through each of the steps during your design process, but also be able to review the content of your portfolio when you're up to that stage.
I think that's a great point. I think the thing in general about engineering teams that have struggled with their portfolios in the past, even with having heaps of mentors, is that they start their portfolios too late and they can't get the input. They get a lot of input on the car design and their cars are really fast, but they don't actually get the input on the document that means a lot more, because I think there's probably more scope to gain points in the portfolio than there is in, the tiny refinements of your car. So if you can sit down with someone and spend maybe even just an hour a week working on a portfolio with an industry person, whether it be a university student or someone actually in an engineering job, or even someone that just studied engineering and is doing something else now. There's plenty of teachers like that. I think that would really maybe bring your portfolio up 20 or 30 points by just spending that time doing your work.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but my dad's an engineer, and from what I see of his work, which is not much because it's in the defense department, but from what I just see ambiently, he's not really doing calculations or testing or that kind of stuff a lot of the time, because he's writing reports, and a big job of an engineer, I believe, is to produce reports. Yeah,
I think it depends on your job, because I know Ethan's job probably was a lot more CAD based, but in a lot of fields of engineering, the report work is 90% of it, and then you spend maybe 10% actually doing the engineering part, and most of the calculations in engineering are already done. So
it's plug in variables.
Yeah, so like the CAD work that we do is actually probably a lot more CAD work than a lot of industry engineers will probably be doing, because they kind of just have programs that design things for themselves.
Yeah, I think also in industry, a lot of the work for us during the competition is this holistic image of CAD manufacturing, whole cars, things like that. But for more industry standard use of those programs, it'd be segmented throughout different people, different teams working on individual components. And things like that.
Yeah, I know my father used to work on the Rolls-Royce engines for aircraft, and his job was part of the fuel manifold for that engine. So that's the fuel supply system. And he just did a small part of that, and that was his whole job at that company.
So there's a company in South Australia that one of our mentors worked for, where he just did door mirrors.
Yeah.
And like door mirrors on a car doesn't seem like a very important thing in the grand scheme of things. But they have like 80 employees working on the single shape of a door mirror.
And not just the shape, but you've
the
got
manufacturing, the molding.
You've got like
electrics.
In aviation, you've got teams working on air conditioning systems in jet airliners. Like, you think that's such a small component, but when you bring it into the larger image of the whole plane, it's actually a very important aspect that could cost a lot of money if it's not implemented correctly.
I think that door mirror is a very good example of the complex system that you interact with every day. If you've got a car with electric mirrors, you've got a whole motor assembly in that. You've got to attach that car mirror to the car. You've got all the manufacturing that goes into all of that. You've got the optics of the mirror itself, and then you've got the crash testing of it as well. And let's forget heating mirrors, dimming mirrors, all that kind of stuff that they're now putting in mirrors as well. Lane departure lights. There's so many people, and where, as Feifei said, you've got that holistic approach in F1 in schools. You're not a small cog in a large machine. You're the large cog in a 2-cog, usually, machine.
Exactly, yeah.
So, yeah, I think we're probably getting a bit sidetracked. But the kind of, I think that kind of is that the people that in industry, they'll be able to help you over a lot of these things because they're not overly complex. I don't think F1 in schools cars are overly complex either. So for an industry engineer, I think most of them will be able to understand what we're doing quite very quickly. So getting their help on your data, your portfolio would be so much better. And I know teams are starting to do it now, but I know we had so many mentors and they read through our portfolios once in our time. And so
I'm not even sure they read through ours.
Exactly.
In Precision,
There's like tiny things of a portfolio that you think will be right, but they're the kind of things that in industry are vital to get right. And those are the kind of things that mentors will pick up on.
And also the judges, if they see more justified engineering decisions that an engineer who knows due process can help you out with, they're then thinking you've got a better technical merit. And it doesn't necessarily look like the kids are getting the work done by someone else, because you will learn this and you will understand this if you spend the time talking to engineers. They will happily help you. And you'll definitely, firstly, do a better portfolio, and secondly, I think you'll develop a better car, because you'll have processes that you probably didn't think about before while you're developing. So I actually think that if you can get help early enough on your portfolio, it might have better results on your car as well.
The more people you have looking at the project, the more ideas that are just going to randomly fire in someone's brain, you know. And so I think we've really covered a lot of the detail that you need to succeed with an engineering portfolio. Does anyone have any last points they want to add?
No.
Any words of wisdom?
Follow the criteria.
That's a great
Start
one.
on them earlier.
Yeah, there we go. I think that's the 2 words of
Yeah.
wisdom we use all the time.
And enlist help. Enlist your help on the portfolio.
Absolutely. Ask for help. Don't be afraid for looking and finding mentors.
And also, one thing I will add onto the asking for help, the people that are most helpful, especially at a world level, are going to be your ICCs, your in-country coordinators. They're a great resource for this kind of thing, because they know exactly what they're going to say, like exactly what they're judging for, exactly what they want, and they'll tell you if you're going the right direction or the wrong direction in your portfolio. And I think that's just a great way of getting to what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think that wraps up today's episode of Off the Track. Thank you, Jesse, and thank you, Fefe, for coming in with us, and thank you, Ethan, for coming on. I hope you all have a good school holidays, because this will be released after a lot of the school holidays. And
This is getting cut out anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Sorry?
This is getting cut out anyway, I think.
Probably, I would imagine. So yeah. Well, we're just going to leave it there, I think.
We're going to leave that in anyway. So,
Are we?
yeah.
Oh,
Lovely,
okay.
lovely.
Assume everything is getting left in. Don't think it's going to get cut.
Oh no.
Gonna make an ass out of you and me.